Hello, hello, and welcome to Keep It Colorful. My name is Jessie Robertson, and this is our Santa boot painting class. If you love painting with acrylic and are looking for detailed, guided, step-by-step tutorials, you are in the right place. I do a new tutorial every weekend, two in fact, one on Saturday and one on Sunday. I do different themes like landscapes, still life, palette knife, black canvas, animal painting, and more. Today we're going to do this really cute seasonal scene just in time for St. Nicholas Day. We are going to explore together some classical painting techniques. We're going to start with a colored ground, which is a way of toning our canvas with a color before we begin. And then we're going to do some layering to really get these realistic textures. So even though we're painting this sort of fantasy holiday theme, we are going to explore some really fun layering techniques. So if you're ready, we're going to go over our supplies and let's begin. If you've never painted with me before, all of my classes are free for a limited time. So they're free for a week for you to enjoy. So come back anytime during this week to enjoy your Santa boot project. If you would like a copy of this class to keep for lifetime access, it's just $5 Canadian, and I send you a copy directly to your email, and that's yours for lifetime access. And if you're part of my Kick Academy subscription, you have unlimited access to this class and over 540 others. So let's begin with supplies. First and foremost, you're going to need something to paint on. And today I'm working on a square canvas. The size is 12 by 12 inches. But because this is a playful holiday scene, feel free to work this on any size of substrate that you would like. Along with something to paint on, you're going to need some paint colors. Feel free to use whatever colors you have on hand, but I'm going to show you the colors that I use to achieve this look here. And they include cadmium red, medium hue, some cadmium orange hue, cadmium yellow, medium hue, some cadmium red light, my favorite bright, vibrant red. You'll need some green. Today I'm using some green deep permanent. The green is for the foliage, so any green will do. Green deep permanent has a really, really beautiful bluish undertone, so it creates this lovely, almost like a tealish, bluish green color. If you have a brighter green like Hooker's green pigment, you can also just add a bit of phthalo blue or turquoise blue to your green if you like that more blue-green effect. We'll be using small amounts of turquoise blue, ultramarine blue, for neutrals, some burnt umber brown, as well as titanium white and a tiny pinch of Mars black. I've poured little quarter-sized dollops of all of these paint colors out on my palette here. So we have our ultramarine blue, turquoise blue, black, some green and yellow. I've poured out a couple of different blobs of yellow. I have one blob of yellow in my cool colors, and I do really have them separated to cool colors on this half of the palette and warm over here. So I've got some yellow, cadmium orange, cadmium red medium, some brown, and then I like to have a couple different blobs of white going at one time. So you can squeeze out some dollops of paint. And we're also going to use some brushes. This is the selection of brushes that I will be using. I'm going to hold them up so you can see the relative size of the brush kind of next to my thumb. And if you're rooting through your own collection, feel free to pick brushes that have a similar shape and a similar size, starting with a number 12 flat brush. This brush is almost an inch wide. It's soft and wonderful for blending. A number 6 bright, a wonderful square shaped brush, which has a fantastic sharp edge when we need control, but it's also soft enough to do blending. It's smaller than that big flat, so this is great for some smaller areas we want to blend in. And for tiny details, I have some little round brushes. They don't have the most intact tips on them, but we don't have any details that are too small today. Here is my number 0 round, or this is my number 0 round, and this bigger one here is the number 1 round. Another flat brush, but this time we've got a little 1/4 inch flat brush. The rest of these brushes from here over are all about creating very specific textures. I would consider these brushes like flats, rounds, and brights, really core artist brushes that you're going to use all of the time. These brushes I also use all of the time, but they're really for creating specific textures, and let's talk about some of those. This is a bristly fan brush. You can see the texture a brush will create by the general shape and roughness or smoothness of the bristles. And this bristly fan brush, you can find these in the oil painting section of your art store, or if you're rooting around on Amazon. But this is really great for blending large areas of color because of its bristly texture. It can create the look of fur, foliage, grasses. This is a heavy hitter when we want textures or scrubbing action. I also have a little acrylic fan. Look how small and cute this is. This is a size 10-0 fan. It's an acrylic fan, so it does have separation, super great for texture, but it's not as coarse as the other fan brush. And if you're playing with fan brushes, get a bigger one and a smaller one. Get a really textured one and an acrylic or watercolor one that's a bit smoother. They are really diverse brushes, fabulous for texture. Just like the Wisp brush, spelled W-I-S-P, not like a whisk for a bowl, like wispy, W-I-S-P. These brushes were filbert brushes, but you can see they have been cut by a machine to have sort of equal segments cut out of them. These I love for texture, especially in evergreen boughs, but also in wood grain. And we do have a couple of fun textures in our painting today. The last brush I wanted to show you is called a mop brush. So mop brushes have a big open shape to them. They look like little puffs when you look at them top down, and these are going to be for helping us create that really soft classical style painting blend in the background. The last brush that I included is another great brush for blending, but that mop brush can really only blend large areas of paint. When we want a more controlled blend, like in the blurry effect of the distant Christmas lights, you'll want something called a round blender. Also round, but it's a little bit stiffer, so this will get you a controlled blend. So I use these if I'm painting a portrait and want to add a rose to a cheek, or like a blush in the cheek. If I'm painting mist, fire, smoke, clouds, light beams through water. So when I need a controlled shape with a soft edge, these are fantastic brushes, again called a round blender brush. I have two sizes here, a 12 and a 6. I can't say much for the quality of the paint on the handle, but I have been using the same round blender brush for several years. So this one's by Princeton, and I love these a great deal. I think you will too. That's it for brushes. This painting is very much loosey-goosey. The only bit of drawing we're going to do is going to be in the boot. So If you have a pencil, a regular pencil will do. So you could just use a regular pencil, but because our background is quite dark, if you happen to have a white chalk pencil, then a white chalk pencil, like you can see if I draw on it there, my little white chalk line shows up really, really well. The nice thing about white chalk is you can kind of just rub it off when you're done using it. A few more supplies that we might want today. I listed glazing liquid, but I actually am out of my glazing liquid. Glazing liquid is a blending medium that you can use to soften edges, and I just used it in this painting in the shadow, but we can also use water for that. Glazing liquid is a clear fluid medium that, again, you can use for softening in shadows, but I'm going to show you to use water today. Make sure you have a big jar of water off to the side and something to clean and dry your brushes with. You can use paper towel, or if you have some old t-shirts or old rags, recycle those and use them as paint drying rags before they are tossed. Another supply that can be really handy dandy is to have a bottle that you can put on a fine mist setting. You can use this to mist the top of your paints while you're working. So if we're working for 2 or 3 hours, you can just lightly mist. This one's automatic. I bought it for my plants, but I've since adopted this one for painting. It's got a little button and the most fine spray, which I love. For a palette, you can use anything that is a little bit shiny. Paper plates with a waxy surface, freezer paper, parchment paper, but my favorite palette is just the glass cutting board. Make sure it doesn't have texture in it or it's going to be a pain in the butt to clean. So this is just a cutting board that I got online, and it makes the absolute perfect glass palette at less than half the price of the artist glass palettes. All right, that's it for supplies. So let's go ahead and start step 1. We are going to build from the background to the foreground, and we're going to start with a colored ground. So grab your number 6 bright brush, or any brush that you like to mix with, palette knife even, and we're going to make ourselves a beautiful kind of sepia brown color. Sepia brown. So I have some burnt umber brown here, and I have some yellow. I'm going to mix about equal quantities of the yellow and the burnt umber brown. And then I'm going to mix in some of my cadmium orange. I'm going to mix in some of my cadmium orange. And let's do a little palette swatch so we can really see the colors a little bit more clear. So this is pretty much equal amounts of the orange, the yellow, and the brown. And I might add a little more yellow. All right, so 2 parts yellow, 1 part brown, and 1 part orange. And we're going to get a really nice warm brown color like this, but it's going to be a little bit see-through, which is what we want. And you can't really tell when you see it in its giant mass on there. So if I were to add some water to this, you can really see the overall hue of this color. It's a sepia brown, and this could be more orange, it could be more brown, it could be more yellow. It's generally going to get covered up, but we are going to paint a coat all over our painting. This can be quite messy, quite thin. You can even start with a bit of water on your brush. And I'm on a canvas that's stretched, so I'm just going to continue using this small bright brush, and I'm going to paint a little bit around my edges. If we frame our paintings in like a floating frame, you can sometimes see the edges of a canvas show through. Having a little something on there is always nice. we'll switch to a bigger brush. But let's first slather on. Again, you can add a little water to your paint to help it flow. Grab a nice juicy amount and let's brush it on. Okay. A little something something on the edges. If you're new to acrylic painting, always keep your brush in so it's wet. Don't let it dry out with paint on it. I keep mine down in the water in between using it. Now I'm going to switch to that big 12 flat brush, and I'm grabbing a very generous amount of this color, and I'm going to spread a thin coat all around. You can even add more yellow or more orange right on the canvas. This colored ground will serve to add what's called a mid-tone value to our painting, allowing us to build up the shadow and highlight tones. And it will also show us anywhere we haven't filled with color on our canvas. And it will also allow us to scrub thinner layers on top with this warmth coming through. So this sort of sepia sienna color is a very common color that was used in classical oil painting, and oil paints were around much longer before acrylic, and even before oil they painted with something called egg tempera, which I studied for a while. That was super fun. The egg tempera painting is pigment mixed with egg yolk. But yeah, so this will allow us to see anywhere we haven't painted, and it will serve to add some middle values in there. And if you've never heard the term value before, it just means a range between bright highlights, what is called a middle value, and then we get into shadows or darker values. So if someone says value in a painting class, you'll know that just means a range of lights to darks. This layer can be choppy. Again, it's just going to shine through. It can be thin and washy. And once we have it here, we are going to dry this layer. So you may want to give your paint a little spritz with some water if you have a water bottle. And then I'm going to grab my trusty blow dryer, which I always list in the supply list, and let's give this a blast. I'm going to turn it on hot and then just move it all around. I have a little silencing feature on my blow dryer. So if you can't hear the blow dryer, that's why. So get this layer nice and dry. I use just a really small travel size blow dryer. If I had a really huge one that got super hot, I might blow dry it in a different way, but mine's really small. When you're ready, we're going to use our sepia color as a base, and we're going to mix up some lighter and darker neutral colors to paint our wood grain and our background. Don't let those paints crest over on top. Give them a little misting. So let's start with our shadow color. I always mix colors with a number 6 bright brush like this. And I'm going to mix around this sepia color here. We're going to take some burnt umber brown and we're going to add into the brown a scoop of green, deep permanent. So it's a dark greenish brown. So our sepia can still be our middle value. This dark greenish brown will be our darkest color. And now we need a highlight color. You can mix more of your sepia. We want to make sure that we have some. Remember, it was 2 parts yellow, 1 part orange, and 1 part burnt umber brown. So this is our sepia, our middle value color. It's this one. Okay. Highlight color. We are going to take some white and let's add in a little bit of yellow and maybe a little scoop of our sepia brown. Yeah, I like this. So that's just white with some yellow and some sepia brown. And for an even brighter highlight, it could just be the white with the yellow. So here, this is our lightest value. These two would be considered our middle value, and then this is our shadow color. And we're going to use that throughout the ground and the background, the wall. We have to pick the spot where the table meets the wall. So rinse off your brush, grab some of your darkest green color, and note that this comes up about 1/3 of the way. So if I were to cut this canvas into thirds with these little pencils, you can see that the top of the boot, and I'm cutting in thirds like horizontally here, the table comes up about 1/3 of the way. The top of the boot is like 2/3 of the way up. So I'm going to roughly come about 1/3 of the way up, and I'm going to add a bit of this dark brownish green color along that tabletop. I'm going to pick up my big fan brush here. I'm going to take a bit of my sepia brown color. And you can see we've got this little kind of beam of lighter color coming through on a bit of a diagonal. I'm going to warn you, I want you to paint fast and loose with me here, okay? So let's get a bristly fan and let's come down on a bit of an angle, kind of like this. And let's put a bit of the sepia kind of maybe around the corners and on this diagonal. And we're going to have this area filled with light. It's a little extra sepia. And then back into our dark color, and we're really going to fill in. And see, when I rub it thin, you can see that warm color shining through because we dried it. I added that sepia brown wet so that it would be a bit easier to blend into. I'm just going to hover over this line. I want to keep it a little bit soft and misty looking. Okay, so again, even if I rub through, it won't be a glaring white color. It's going to have that golden color shining through. Be a little darker here. And don't worry, it doesn't have to be a clean line because at the table, because we are going to paint over that. But I want us to get the color on, so paint fast and loose. Rinse your brush, get some of your second lightest color, wiggle it on. You can add a little yellow in there or a little orange if you want to keep it really warm. And I'm scrubbing with my fan. Scrubbing it. So it's a bit lighter in the middle and using my sepia color to keep it a bit darker at the tips and really kind of just gently, if I blend like this all over, this is all going to become one color. So when my dark color, I want it to kind of fade slowly. I'm not going to pull this right into the center because it will make it dark. So I'm just kind of hovering over where my dark and medium color meet. I know this part moves a bit fast, but this is called wet on wet blending, so we do have to go fast and loose. So once you've applied the color, and if you look at mine up close, it's kind of all messy and whatnot. It's all good. Let's grab our mop brush. It can be dry or slightly damp. I'm going to go dry. I'm going to start, I might add a bit more paint. Okay, I'm going to start using my mop brush to feather this together and make it super duper soft. I'm going to use a bigger one. Yeah, like this guy. And I can scrub because if I, like here, I picked up all the paint, but look at that beautiful color shining through. And then once again, when you get to the area where the dark meets the light, just lightly feather it together because when I touch the dark paint, I pick it up. So see if I were to go over there, oh, it gets all over there. If your brush is too dirty to blend in the light area, give it a quick rinse and tap off on a paper towel. It doesn't have to be perfectly clean, and more often than not, you can just buff out anything extra. Don't worry about little hairs from your mop brush. When you're done your painting and it's dry, because we're painting pretty thin, I typically will do like a hair check sometimes right when I'm finished a painting. And typically you can just use a wet finger or paper towel to lightly rub it off without hurting the painting below at all. So here we have, it's blended like oil paints blend. It's soft and lovely, and that's the kind of look that we're gonna go for here. I know that wet on wet stuff is fast, but it is totally worth it for the soft effects that we can get. So we should have, if we were to cut in thirds kind of diagonally, this little third here is going to be darker, and that will set off the Christmas lights. And the darker background allows for the highlight on the boot to really pop. So when we build our paintings up, we're thinking about how the background will inform the foreground. So take your time getting the blend on. And I like to make sure I've run out of my sepia color. That type of blending, if you're struggling at all, you may just need to use a little bit more paint. Unless you have so much paint on it's just slipping into one color, then I would advise you to slow down and blend. Like we have to blend quickly, but we still want to be conscious of where the light colors and dark colors meet. And don't worry about messing up or having problems with acrylic painting, because we have to make the mistake in order to get familiar with the medium. So if you're new to acrylic painting, going too far, over blending, adding too much paint, we all have to do it. So you might as well do it now so that you can keep progressing and enjoying the journey of acrylic painting. All right, before we move into the ground, I'm going to make sure I have some of that sepia color, which we will use a little bit more. So 2 parts yellow, 1 part brown, and a little orange. Even add a little red in there. Okay. I want you to grab a bright brush or a flat brush that has an intact edge. So one that has a nice fine edge. You could even use a little fan brush as long as it's got a nice intact flat tip. And let's come into our homemade black, our brown. I wipe in between colors. I don't always give it a full rinse. Our homemade dark brownish black. And we're going to begin building up some layers to get this really cool wood green effect. And if I hold up close, we had some layers in there to get this cool texture. We'll use our fan brushes, but first we're going to establish some of the planks in this table. In the center of the image, the line is pretty much straight up and down. And then notice the angles, the perspective. So from center, we then angle going a little bit out this way, and then a little bit angling out this way at the bottom. And on the other side, it's the opposite. So from here, we're angling out this way, and then even more this way. So let's come just a little bit left of center. We'll go mostly straight. It's on a little bit of an angle, right? So here's straight up and down. Here's just a little bit leaning that way. Now let's just draw a dark line to represent the crack in that table. Then I have 2 more. Okay, so they're both kind of equally spaced at the top, these little lines. Let's do 2 more. So they're all kind of equally spaced at the top. Then this one's going to get a little bit wider towards the bottom and angle out. And the same thing with this one. So we're going to do a little something like this. And now opposite on this side. So here we're angling out this way. And then even more like this. And these can be messy. I like to think this is an old wooden and like European old, like an old wooden table. I went to a Waldorf school when I was little, so we did kind of like a St. Nicholas Day, which is when I was little, I had a book of cultures, and it talked about all of the different myths and legends of a Santa Claus type figure. Every country around the world has a similar story. And if you're bored later, if you use ChatGPT or Google, you can Google the different legends. There are some that have Santa arriving on a ship from Spain. Other times the tradition is one Russian one was like a Santa type figure and a granddaughter that go around. It's really fun stuff. Once you've got the dark lines established in your boot, if you have a whisk brush, it doesn't have to be a whisk brush, but if you have a whisk brush, drip water into some of this dark color until it is the consistency of, say, maple syrup. So really runny, fluid, ink-like consistency. Well, let's get a few little shadows in here going along the grain of the wood. I'm going to snuggle in so you can see. You can use the whole whisk brush itself, which has a very feathery kind of texture, but we can also do even some little ovals. And I'm holding my whisk brush up the long skinny way, so kind of like 45 degrees, and I'm just going to do some little marks with the tip of it. The watery paint means it's not quite as dark. As the first line we put on. Okay, so again, you can use the whole length of the whisk brush to create marks like this, but also hold it up 90 degrees. So take a peek here. I'm going to show you the 2 marks this brush makes. Flat like this, drag it with the watery paint. You can see separation in the bristles. But if you hold it not the fat way, but up so we've got that skinny edge, you can also make some really thin lines. And make sure your tabletop is kind of evenish at this point. You can use some of your sepia color or something. I like to keep the line kind of soft, so it just fades into the background, but do make sure it's even. And just a few little marks, little ovals or circles to represent knots in the wood. And we're just going to start to build up that texture. Brought out some little festive. This is some of our Christmas ornaments. We are just getting ready to put up our tree. Okay. Just like when we dried the sepia layer, and here you can see where I've scrubbed through and some of that layer is showing through, we want this layer to dry. If we blend in wet paint on top, we will lose the definition. But by working in layers and allowing one layer to dry before we get into another layer, we can have this show through and keep the textures we've created intact. So let's go ahead. Here's my old spray bottle. I like to mist the tops of my paint if I'm going to be blow drying because I'm in close proximity. And we've got our heater on, so it's a little dry in the air, and that definitely makes them dry faster. Little mist to the paints, and then let's give this layer a blast with the blow dryer to keep it dry. Here we go. Now with this layer nice and dry, we're going to be using this same set of colors to get into our table. Let's take a look at where the lights and darks are in the table. So we do have a bit of a shadow, kind of a similar angle to what we have in the top of the painting. So we've got the light kind of coming down in the middle of the table a little bit stronger. So we're going to use some of our sepia color and some of our 2 highlight colors. I'm going to take my bristly fan brush and I'm going to mix a little bit of my sepia brown with some white to kind of make an in-between color. And I want to just have kind of a light brush load. So kind of like just the tip of the brush. And there's going to be that shadow coming across. So it's going to be light here. And it's going to kind of taper off about here. And now that I know where my lights and darks are, I'm going to take some of this color and I'm going to Just drag it down. I'm using a little bit of that sepia brown in here just to come lightly across the top. And then let's pull down, trying to get a little bit of a juicy texture. A little bit of a grainy texture here. I'm going to grab a bit more of the sepia brown because I want it to be a little bit darker. On this side. Getting into some of the lighter color. And you can turn your brush up vertically and pull through. You can experiment with your wisp brush here as well, which also creates a lovely texture. Let's add a little bit of water to some of our light color. And I like to top the brush off so it's just a little bit light. Again, you can use the whole fat part of a wisp brush, but my favorite thing is to toggle and hold it up at a 45-degree angle as well. Just letting it kind of fade away. Don't worry if you lose some of the darks. We're building on our layers. Taking a bit of our sepia brown color. I'm using my big fan brush here, my bristle fan. And I'm just pulling some of this sepia color up in that little kind of corner to help accentuate a little bit down around the bottom. You can very lightly feather them together. As long as we don't cover everything up, we should be getting some fun. And I'm always kind of pulling my brush strokes down this way, keeping it a little soft and messy in the distance. Maybe a little bit of our lighter colors. Our lightest color. In here. I'm going to pull on some little streaks like this, and then I'm going to soften it all together. Okay, so streaks are on. I'm going to dry my brush. Or wash my brush and just use kind of a mostly clean, slightly damp fan to hover over it. We'll add those dark lines in there again later. I love wood grain texture. Painting them is so fun. If a brush I'm using isn't cooperating with you, give it a try, but then move on to a different brush. Any brush that has a flat edge can pull in these little lines. And with this step, when you're finished, we are done our background layer. So do any last minute tweaks. Just take a bit of sepia along the edge. You can go into a bit of your homemade black and pull the line down, the dark line. In between the wood planks. But get your blending on first, and then we can clean up those lines again. My homemade black is burnt umber brown with some green deep permanent, but you can use like black too. I often like using homemade black where I can because it always has a bit of color in it. And when you make a homemade black out of two dark colors in your overall palette, it can have a lovely unifying effect on your overall painting with little bits of the green and brown showing through in the homemade black. Or if I was doing a blue painting, I might use dark blue and a dark red for my homemade black. Ellen asks, what type of brush hairs do you prefer? I see so many on the market, it's very confusing. Most all of the brushes that I use are acrylic brushes like this, which are made out of nylon or Taclon. I don't use sable brushes because they're very expensive. Those are like a natural hairbrush, and acrylic paint is a bit harder on your brushes. So go for the cheap mid-value brushes. Companies like Princeton Art and Brush Co. This is one of my only natural hair brushes that I have. I forget what it is. It might be boar hair or squirrel hair, but typically nylon or Taclon. And honestly, any brush that is made by one of the older artist brand companies will have a student line of very affordable brushes. I put some of my favorites in my Amazon supply shop on my website, and I do use the same set of brushes and colors for all of my classes. And then you can kind of explore from there. I do slowly add new brushes so that we can keep learning, but I have a core set. Let's give this a dry, and then we're going to draw on our boot. So grab your blow dryer and let's give this a blast. My hubby brought me some peppermint tea. So let's talk about the basic shape of our boot today. We do a lot of rough work here at Keep It Colorful I will draw everything with you. We'll do it all together. Sometimes we practice textures and color mixing. Dry versus wet techniques. I need a clean page here. Where are we? Okay. So for the boot, it's going to be mostly just a modified rectangle shape. So we'll draw however big we want the width of our boot. And I'll show you how long on here the width is. I have equal amounts of space on each side. So our boot. And then we're going to have the shaft of our boot is essentially a rectangle. So if you were to draw it as a very basic shape, you could just draw it like, have you ever broken your leg and worn that big awkward cast to your ankle? You know, it kind of looks like this. It's the basic shape of the boot, only we're gonna make it a soft Santa boot. So the heel is gonna have, let's do the bottom into thirds. The heel is gonna have a bit of definition, as is the top. So if we divide this into thirds, let's do a bit of a curved line at the base for these two. We'll come up a little bit and in, this is for the heel of the boot. When we paint this on, we're going to make this line a little bit thicker for the sole of the boot. And then this is going to be a bit of a heel. Okay, so this will be the heel of the boot. And you can even do like an old cobbler, the little heel sewing on the boot. The toe of Santa's boot, I went for a super classic kind of shape. Just give it a bit of a roundedness. Like the toe is here. This is coming up to the midfoot of the boot. Okay. So round it out. And you can even do a little line like I did across and down here. So this is like the toe of the boot. Our shine in the boot's going to be about here. The bridge of the foot would come up inside the boot. And then it's mostly straight up. I have the boot widening a little bit at the top, and it's pinched in with a buckle right about here. So it's pinched in. So I've got the soft boot coming along, and then we'll have a little rectangle, soft rectangle on top, which will represent the fur on Santa's boot. But that's it. We're going to put a little buckle on here. The buckle itself just comes across, and we'll do a square shape for the buckle, triangle shape for the end of the tab. Okay, you've totally got this. Right, so just some modified. Remember, we started with this, the shaft of the boot, the toe of the boot. You could think of it in thirds, the lower part of the boot, so that we can raise up a little bit for the heel. Then modify to make it a little softer. Grab your pencil or your white chalk. And let's sketch it on. On a 12 by 12 inch square, I have the bottom of the boot coming up to the toe about 2 inches. And I'm going to draw a line across so that we have, I've got, I would say about 2 inches to the end here, or 2.5 inches, about 2 inches here. So I'm really going to fill the space. This will be kind of like the end of the boot. And if we were to cut this through center, like this, you can see, so if I were to draw a little line up the center of my canvas, the front of the boot kind of comes just a little bit in to the center. And on the other half of my painting, the boot on this if I cut it in half, it comes over halfway. So if I were to, in fact, cut this into quarters, you can see that the boot really fills up just a single quarter on this side. What I mean is if I have this section here and cut it in half, that's about how far over my boot is coming. And remember when we broke into thirds this way, and you can just draw the boot on. I'm just showing you if I were looking at an image and wanting to transfer it pretty exactly proportion-wise onto my own canvas, this is how I break it down. Give yourself some reference points, thirds, halves, grids. Okay, so here's 2/3. Here's roughly 2/3. Ooh, I nailed it. Okay, so there's the top of the boot, including the fluff. Kind of comes out a little bit for the heel, a little shape there. Okay. And then the toe of the boot, again, you can start with that even simple square shape and we can modify it from there. So the heel of the boot is going to come up a little bit. And again, let's cut our boot, however big your boot is, into thirds, because the heel, if we were to think of the bottom of this boot as one line, my heel comes 1/3 of the way in from the back of the shoe. So I'm just going to draw a little line a little bit up. Okay, there's that heel. And then the midfoot's going to kind of come down and then just kind of flatten around the bottom of the shoe. So you've just got a little lift. Santa doesn't want anything crazy. He's delivering gifts. So there's the sole of the shoe, and here's the heel. Give a little angle in. This will be our big chunky heel. And the toe of the boot, you're going to draw a little line that kind of comes across and down. I gave it a big old round toe. Midfoot of the boot's going to come up on an angle. Then I have mine kind of fanning out a little bit at the top, kind of on both sides like this. Take your time. If anyone's new here, I've been painting since I was 12 and I'm 43, so I've logged some practice. I would never want you to feel discouraged if I make something look easy. It took me a long time, so always be gentle with yourself and just have fun. There's a bit of fur on top, so you can represent that with a little rectangle shape. And this is a fantasy holiday theme, so you have a lot of wiggle room for interpretation and play. Let's sketch on a little bit where we want to have our buckle. I have mine coming just above where the shoe starts coming into the shaft of the boot here. And feel free to do laces. This is just my fantasy version of the Santa boot. It's got the big black strap with the gold or silver buckle. So for now, we'll just represent it as the strap coming across. And it's kind of on top of that strap that I really want things to fan out a little bit. Like it's a soft boot, and this is how it's held together. We will have a little triangle shape where the buckle will come in, and this will eventually be where the buckle is, just a rectangle shape. I know I said not to draw it because we do have to paint over it, but sometimes drawing it first gives a little practice. Now there's one more thing I want you to sketch on here, and that is the candy cane on the bottom. That candy cane is going to have a shadow just like the boot, and it's nice to get shadows done right away. That way we can layer stuff on top of them. So shadows can be kind of crude and rough to pull into a painting. So I like to get those done as a background layer so that if we do need to tweak the shadows, we can. Candy cane shape, you know, Whoop, I've got some little demos up here. So this particular candy cane is coming off on a bit of an angle, kind of right in front of the boot. Let's make it a big, fat, and juicy candy cane. Start with just like a really long, skinny rectangle shape, and then arc it around like this. So a classic candy cane shape, make it even-ish. So however wide your candy cane is. And if you have a hard time with details or shaking, the fatter the candy cane, the easier the details will be. Okay. That's going to help us with the shadow. And I'm also going to have a little sprig of greenery here. We're going to want to pull a shadow in under there as well. And if you like, our greenery is going to kind of come out of our boot. I kind of look at the shape. I'm like, draw a line down the center. So it's like one's coming down here, and I just give myself a little line in the general trajectory of those greens. And sometimes I'll do the same for the holiday lights. I have kind of 2 strings of lights kind of coming up like this. I'm just going to really lightly draw with the chalk. And if we want them kind of equal spaced, we might want to give ourselves a little 1, 2, 3, just a couple little reference points. And that's it for our drawing element today. It is time to get into my favorite part, which is going to be the painting of the boot. It's fun colors and textures from here on out. We are mostly done with our browns, but we might want to do a little extra highlighting in our table or tweaking in the background. So I do recommend keeping those paints highlighted. Highlighted, not highlighted. Hydrated is the word I'm looking for. Keep those paints hydrated. We're going to begin in some black in our boot. So grab your 1/4 inch flat brush, your little guy like this, and let's give ourselves a nice black sole onto our boot. I'm going to go into the pure black here, not the homemade black, because this is an actual black object, and anything we do in a black right out of the tube is going to be really impactful. So come on in with that black, and let's widen the sole of the boot. Let's widen the sole. So here is our heel. I'm going to come around the back of my boot a little bit. You can add a little bit of water to your paint to help it flow. Just a little bit will do. And try to keep your sole about the same thickness all the way through. While you're here, take a little bit of white into a tiny bit of black so you've got kind of a dark gray color. And I want you to put a little highlight on the sole there, and just inside the black, drag this into the wet black, okay? Just inside from the pure black. Hold the skinny edge of your brush down, okay? And then just pull through. This is kind of a little highlight on the top of the sole where it connects to the shoe, and we'll put some stitching in there too. You can put a little highlight into the heel as well. Okay, it's really subtle, but these little subtle details can really add to your paintings. And now it's time to make our red gradients. It's time to make our red gradients. Grab your number 6 bright brush, and here we go. Take a little bit of your red, we'll mix our lightest color first. Add a little bit of white and a nice big scoop of yellow. And this will give us our highlight color. It's kind of like a coral. And then we'll have our pure cadmium red in its max tone on its own. And then we'll take some of our cadmium red. There are 2 ways to darken red. I'll show you both. One is add a little bit of green to your red. And here's red with a little bit of green. It makes a beautiful dark burgundy red. You can also mix red. If you use black, you have to use less because the tinting strength of black is way stronger. They'll just be very subtly different maroon colors. Okay. So both black and green make a lovely medium red. And for our darkest red, it's add either more of your green or more of your black so you get a really dark, almost blackish burgundy. And this will be our progression through our red colors for this boot. If you ever feel lost while I'm walking you through the steps, I want you to trust your eyes. Where you see a highlight, paint a highlight. If it looks more like a shadow or mid-value color, add that color. The light source is always important in a painting, and I should have asked you before showing you. I know you could probably tell by looking at the highlight on this boot what direction the light source is coming. Is it coming down from the right or is it coming down from the left? Again, if you ever feel lost, just look at where the light source is and pull the highlights onto the side closest to the light and slowly fade into the shadows. I'm going to start with some of my darkest shadowy blackish red here. And here's the boot is like a round shape. So the toe of the boot kind of wraps around the foot. So down here is away from the light. So I'm going to put a little bit of this shadowy red down here. And a little bit of this dark red under the brim of the fur, because the fur is kind of coming over top of the boot. So the fur itself is casting a bit of a shadow. And I might use the corner of my brush and then make this mark a little messy even. You can outline the boot. My white chalk is rubbing in a little bit, just so you don't lose your edge. Okay. But shadows, I'm going to keep my stitching in here with shadows and highlights. Right, so the boot kind of, the direction of the foot, you know, it's kind of like here's the side of the foot and then it kind of would wrap around the toe. I'm just going to paint my buckle in later. Let's focus on the reds first. So here's some of those shadow reds. When you're ready, rinse your brush, tap it on a napkin. Let's go into some pure cadmium red medium. Blending in towards the shadows. And because we're blending in a small area, again, just lightly tap over the line where the two colors meet. Okay. And this might be like a crushed kind of velvet or leather. So it can have a little texture. And for texture, I'll kind of do these little strokes like this, like little V's or Y's, but really small. So tap, 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 changing the direction of the brush over the seam where the shadow meets this saturated mid-tone. And wipe off your brush if you get too much of a dark color on there. Let's add a bit of a highlight into the heel, right over the dark color. You could give a little like wiggle or wobble to the shadow side. So getting in our dark red color, rinse your brush. Take a little bit of our highlight color, that coral color, and let's put it into the highlight part of the boot here and here. Don't forget the fur is creating a bit of a shadow there. I'm going to add some more yellow near this highlight. Kind of got it on, and now I'm going to wipe my brush. I'm just going to tap around the edge of this boot highlight. Feather it in. You can use some of your plain red at the edges as well, the saturated red. We'll be adding one more layer into the boot. not over the whole thing, but just to, we're working over a dark background, so we want to build up a little bit more saturation. While we're waiting for this first coat to dry, let's go ahead and pull in that shadow under our boot. I'm going to use my shadow color burnt umber brown plus some green for this shadow. Mix a little more if you have to. I might add a little red into this shadow color too. So it's going to be a nice dark brown. I'm going to put a little bit of this color, just a little bit, right under the boot. And we're going to use, you can use glazing liquid the same way I will use the water here, which will be just at the edge of the color to soften it in. Okay, so here's my shadow under my boot, but I don't want it to be a super hard line because that is not how shadows look. So we got to work wet on wet. Once you get the color on, rinse the brush, tap it off so it's just kind of damp. Let me snuggle in. We're just going to take our clean damp brush at the edge of the shadow and just soften the edge. Just soften it a little bit. Okay. I'm going to come under this area here too, where that green sprig is going to be, because it will be casting a shadow over here as well. And I'm going to cast a little shadow on the opposite side of the light under my candy cane on both sides. And once the shadow is on, I'm going to rinse off my brush. I'm just going to gently kind of buzz it in a little bit. Now while we're here, if you need to clean up your blacks at all, we can get into some of our black. It's time to put a base layer in the furry part of Santa's boot. So get those shadows on. I'm just misting the top of my paints ever so slightly to keep them wet on the palette. We have a bluish shadow on the far right, and then we've got a kind of golden brown shadow on the left that's closest to the light source. I'm going to take one of my wisp brushes, and let's take a little bit of burnt umber brown and add a little bit of our turquoise blue to that color. It should make a pretty stunning, steely kind of gray color. it looks really dark. Let me lighten this so you can see the undertone. It's a beautiful sort of dark steely gray. And if we add a little bit of white to that color, it makes a beautiful shadow color, a grayish blue. I'm going to take some of this tealish brown mixture and I'm going to have my shadow kind of running down this half of the boot, largely filling it in, but making it a little messy, a little fluffy. So pulling some little marks. And again, having some of the beautiful golden background color show through is just fine. Could even get a little bit of your ultramarine blue under this side too. In fact, let's take a little bit of white into some ultramarine blue. We're going to mix a bit of a blue color, and I want you to pull a little bit of that color into the shadow side. It should be a little bit darker than I've got here of the boot. And this is for something called reflected light. Reflected light on the back of the boot. Gonna blend it in a little bit. And you can see in the final layer of this boot, I blue coming through back here and in the shadow side. For the highlight side of the fur, can take a little bit of white into some of our sepia brown and pull it. Should be a little bit lighter than whatever your background color is here. And we're going to do the same thing with a little whisk brush or flat brush. We're going to can pull out a few little wisps and then just soften this in to the shadow color and little taps with some kind of gaps in between. You can get some of your sepia brown in there too. These underpainting layers will allow us to add white highlights, but still see the texture because we're seeing the shadow colors of the fur. So kind of just blocking in the underpainting. I love painting fur, so my fur keeps growing as I work it. All right. We're going to pull the strap across Santa's boot. So grab one of your 1/4-inch flat brushes and go into some black. Add a little bit of water to your paint just to help it flow. And let's pull that strap across our boot. So I like coming kind of from a little bit on top of the midfoot and just straight across here. And we're just going to put a little strap onto the boot. Try to get it the same width all the way across. Mine has a very gentle curve. Once you've filled in the black, rinse off your brush and come into one of your shadowy reds, your dark red colors, like this, and pull a little shadow under the strap. We have our underpainting on the boot. We're going to do just a few highlights to bring this guy from here to having a shiny shoe. We'll add the white highlights into the fur, some stitching in here, and we'll do all the details in our boot, and then we're going to move on to the lights and the greenery. So at this point in time, I want you to go ahead and let's dry our boot layer 1 so we can get into the final details. I'm going to turn this little travel size blow dryer on hot and give it a blast. So here is where I like to add a little bit of the cadmium red light into the boot. Cadmium red light is a beautiful, vibrant red. I'm just going to get rid of some of my chalk lines around this boot that I'm not using anymore. There we go. So cadmium red light, oh my goodness. It's such a juicy, vibrant red color. Even just here on the palette, you can see this red tickles the eyeballs. Now let me show you this red next to the cadmium red medium. You can see why it's such a beautiful highlight color. It's a warmer red. And if we were to take a bit of the cadmium red light and add a little bit of white and a bit of yellow, we can get some really warm kind of highlight colors out of that for this final layer. And I like having a bit, because the whole background is a warm sepia color, I want all of my highlights to have a warm tinge to them. Even the candy cane that's not pure white, that is a warm white. The table is a warm, and even all the highlights in the boot have a warm tinge to them. So this layer is actually going to be really subtle. We're not going to paint all over the whole thing. We're just going to add highlights and then some of the cadmium red medium just to help blend them in. So we're going to put a big highlight in the toe. So I want to add a little bit of the cadmium red medium just to give it something to kind of, oops, my boot grew a bit there. Give it a little something to blend into. So I might just come in with a bit of the cadmium red medium, not right down in the shadow spot, just kind of on here. And look at how just a second coat of the cadmium red medium can really add some vibrancy here. And layer 2 is always fun because you can kind of dot and scumble and create texture over the shadows. Layering in acrylic is where the magic really comes in. And look at the vibrancy of this boot. Before this dries, I'm going to take some cadmium red light into the tip of the boot. A little here. Even do a little highlight along the stitching a little bit. I'm gonna do really just some subtle highlighting with the cadmium red light. And you can try adding, if you don't have cadmium red light, you can try adding a little bit of yellow to warm it up and a little bit of yellow and white to this color to get a similar color. Not quite as juicy, but it gets pretty close. So now we've got this super vibrant boot. Why don't we take some of our whitish yellow that we use to highlight the background? And the brightest highlight's going to be right at the tip of the boot here. With the wet background, I'm just going to take the whole fat side of my brush. I'm going to try to tap it in to get that kind of subtle sheen on the boot. Subtle texture. Okay, so that's actually it for the red layer. Because we already have a layer, we just wanted to brighten and texturize a little bit. You can add more highlight if you feel like you need to. Again, try just tapping with the fat side of a flat brush to blend this into your wet, the wet color we put on there. Okay. All right, I love a good highlight layer over top of a good base underpainting. Let's take a little flat brush and go into some white. And I want you to use a little flat brush that has a fairly intact edge, because we're going to use this flat edge of this little flat brush to create some stitching in the boot. So right over top of that line, that kind of like subtle shadow that we made, and I'm going to rotate this to make it a bit easier and so I don't rub into that wet paint that's come along, and little taps. You don't have to have the stitching, but I think it adds a nice like elf cobbled boot look to the painting. Yeah. Let's take some of our light gray that we made. Really light gray, so not quite pure white. And let's do a little line kind of just on the inside of this dark strap at the top and at the bottom. And then we're going to take this and we're going to come in and we're going to do a little triangle shape. This is where the tab on the boot ends. Okay. Let's take some of the same light gray color, and again, using that little square brush, let's put a little buckle. It can be like a rounded rectangle shape, or even just a rectangle shape, equal-ish width around. And you could do this in gray for a silver buckle. You could do this in the warm sepia colors for a golden buckle. And you can tint it after, by the way. Like if you want to turn this gold, which I probably will, you can add some of these yellowy colors later. Let me grab my little zero round brush and add some little buckle holes. And then the little, I don't know what to call this, you know, like the tab of the buckle. First kind of doing it in this solid color. And then I'm going to take some white across the top of the buckle. Across the top of the bottom edge. Across the inside of the inner edge. Okay. We have a buckle. Again, we can make it gold, but I added just a bit of a yellow with some sepia color in over top of this kind of gray. Or you leave it silver. If you have gold paint and you're itching to use it for the holidays, you could also put some real gold paint on there. But to make it look reflective, you need a highlight. So you can highlight your real gold paint as well. Now we're going to put the final highlights into the boot. I like to add a little bit of some of these warm colors to the white. And so little furs coming out. It's going to get fuzzy on top, but we're going to have to add some evergreens. So I might not do the top edge just yet. Just let some of the background color show through. You can add a little bit of your homemade turquoisey gray and just make it a little bit lighter. Get a little sepia in there too. Okay. Get the fuzzies into those boots. And when you're ready, we're going to go ahead and pull on our Christmas lights. If you have a round blender brush, this is a great one to play with for blending in. You can also tap in with your finger. I want you to take a little bit of your green deep permanent and add just a little bit of white. So it's still a pretty dark green. It just has a little bit of white in it. So green deep permanent is a beautiful bluish green, and this is the color with a little bit of white. So to make our lights look like they're glowing dark on the outside, then if we add even more white to this color, we're going to have like a beautiful mint green. And then this will be a very lighter, more pastel version of the color, a light value, which will go on the inside of the light. And we're just going to keep the edge blurry using our round blender brush. If you don't have a round blender brush, you can even tap with your finger or just scrub it with a little 1/4 inch flat brush. Okie doke. So I'm going to add a little bit of water to some of this paint to help make it a little bit more see-through. And I'm going to do a little one of these right here, and I'm going to tap in some paint, and then I want to tap the brush off so there's like almost no more paint left in it. And a clean brush, and I'm just going to gently tap around the edge. Okay, I want to blur this out like it's a fuzzy light in the distance. Let's come into that lighter green color you made. Put just a little bit in the center, and you can keep tapping with your brush. You can even just gently tap with your finger. It also gets a soft kind of blurry look. Just tap in the edge. You can add a bit more of the dark color if you need to. Let's do another one of these green lights as soon as you're ready. I love this green color, so I'm going to put another one right here, starting with the darker color. And just softening it out at the edge. So there's very little paint on the brush when it comes to softening out those edges. And I'm going to do another green one. I'm going to do an orange one here. And another green one, yeah, right here. So tapping it in, I might do one more way up here. And then make sure you clean your brush and take off almost all of the paint so that you can use a clean, damp brush to really help feather the edges out. Scrub the edge, just the edge, not all over, just where it meets the background, okay? Then you can go into some of the lighter color. Put just a little bit of that light green in the middle. You will have to clean your brush again. Don't miss the step. Clean your brush. Tap off excess water so we have a clean brush, and then tap around the edge, blending it out into the dark color. Just tap a little bit. Just kind of, you can use your finger too, but it's not as easy to control as the brush. Just want you to get that little bit of a blurry edge so that from a distance, it looks super soft. If you go too far, just take a little bit more of your dark green deep permanent around the edge again, okay? And look at that blurry effect. So up close, it's like, just like this, and then it gets that super fun, fuzzy look. I did the same thing with some cadmium red medium and some orange. And instead of the light green in the center, we use a light yellow or a light orange in the center. So let's just do one color at a time. Rinse off your brush. We're going to add the tiniest little bit of white to some of our colors. So I may go for some cadmium red medium with just a little bit of white in there. Or I could add a bit of this coral color. And tap, 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 tap. Tap, 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 tap. Start small because these can tend to grow. Once I've got that base color on, I'm going to rinse my brush out fast and loose, tap it on a napkin, and just hover over the outside of this color blob just to kind of spread out the edges. And we can do the same thing with some cadmium orange. Just add a little bit of white to the color, and then let's do an orangey one or two. and just spread it out. Rinse your brush, top off excess water, and then just use a clean, just barely damp brush around the edge to get that blurry look. You can have a few random soft lights anywhere you like. Okay? For the inside of these lights, we're going to use a really, really light yellow, or even a really, really light orange. So white with a bit of the orange, or white and yellow. Just a light warm color for these red hued ones. Okay. So I'm going to use a light yellow into the centers of some of these, or maybe a light orange into, whoa, that's too much paint. Just a little bit of paint. Rinse off your brush. Tap off excess water and let's just tap it in. Go so slow around those edges, okay? You can use your finger. It's a little bit harder to control where the paint goes. But if you go too far, just take a little bit of the darker color too around the edge. If you feel like you got too much light, you can definitely just go in with a little bit more of your dark color too. Okay, some twinkling lights. And now let's get into the greenery, and we're gonna fill this boot with some holiday goodies. I want you to imagine that the little berries and the shiny balls aren't in the boot yet. We're gonna start with a base of greenery. We're gonna start with a base of greenery. You can use your mini 10-0 fan or a wisp brush. Both are going to be really fabulous at pulling in our greenery. And add a little bit of water, just a little, to some of your green, deep permanent. And we're going to have greenery coming out of this boot. Even a little over top of the boot. And then the greenery itself kind of comes out on a little angle. So like kind of like little V's coming out of the boot. So I'm gonna come in with some of my plain green just on top to kind of fill it in a little bit. And then I want you to think of the little sprigs coming out like little V's. Kind of on each side. And they kind of come to a little bit of a point. We can have one coming out over the boot. And you can add a little bit of water to your paint to help it flow. So adding a little water to your paint if you're having a hard time. You can add a little yellow if you want a warmer green. I'm going to do that in some highlights in just a minute. But for now, the base coat. And I make sure that the greens are really nice and dense, kind of in the center of the boot here, all along here, where they're going to provide a nice backdrop for the stuff inside of the boot. When you're ready, take some of your green and let's add a little sprig of greenery in the lower part of the boot here. Oh, kitty cat. My cat's on the table. Come on, honey. Don't step on the computer. Dawn. Dawn. I have the cutest cat, but she likes to be all up in the painting. So let's put another little dark green sprig down here. You can do a little line for the center, and then again, it's kind of like little V shapes coming off of the center of the sprig. We can add a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white, just a little bit, to some of our green. And I like to do just a few little highlights right into the wet green. I'm going to concentrate the highlights on the left-hand side of the sprigs. And you can keep this all very loose. Meaning you don't have to paint every single needle, just pull in a few highlights on the side closest to the light. Just a little bit to break up the solid mass. Don't overthink it. The light's coming down from this direction again, so hitting the tops. If it's hitting here, maybe the tip. The greens are really a dark base for the candy cane and the berries and the shiny ornament to pop. So while we wait for our greenery to dry, we're going to start pulling in the base for our lower candy cane. And we are going to pull some shading into the candy cane before we pull on those red stripes to really establish its three-dimensional form. So if you remember that turquoise blue plus burnt umber brown mix, that's the mix we're going to use for the base of our shadow. So some burnt umber brown and some turquoise blue. And if you add a little bit of white to this color, once again, we should get a little bit of like a steely blue gray, kind of a blue-green gray. This is turquoise blue plus brown, burnt umber brown with a little bit of white. It's kind of a greeny blue gray, a tealish gray. And that's going to be the shadow color for the candy cane. Remember, the light's coming down, so the top of this candy cane will be in highlight. This is the shadow side. So to make this 3D, we're going to pull the shadow using a little flat brush down the inside length. Right until it curves over. And then the shadow is at the curved part of the candy cane is really going to pick up on the opposite side of the candy cane to really show it's curving around. Rinse your brush and come into some of your whitish yellow and fill in the highlight side of your candy cane. Remember, all the whites are going to have that little bit of warmth to them. So the shadow side of the candy cane, the highlight side, then I like to take my brush and just kind of lightly hover over where the light color meets the shadow. Okay. painting in a small little area and blending in a small shape like a candy cane to get 3D texture is challenging. So take your time. This will give realism and depth to our candy cane. I want you to take a little bit of your cadmium red, medium, and let's pull in a little circle right here and a little circle right here. And let's take some of our dark shadow color, that brown plus teal, but without any white in it. And we can pull a little shadow off on the right-hand side for these little guys. So everything's gonna look super 3D when we're done today. Let's go ahead and dry our greenery so we can pull a candy cane and then just a couple shiny berries and balls into our Santa's boot. Once you get here, we're rounding on the final tweaks and details. I'm gonna grab this blow dryer and give it a blast. Now you can just go ahead and paint in that candy cane shape, but you may want to draw it in, sticking out of the boot and curling over. You can kind of choose how wide you want your candy cane to be. So I'm just gonna sketch it in roughly. And then I want a little kind of ornament or ball right here. And then the berries, we can just go ahead and paint berries on anywhere else that we really want some pops of red. Let's grab our little flat brush and grab that shadow color. For this candy cane, it's going to be the same. You're going to paint that shadowy color on the right-hand side, the inside of the curve. Okay? On the inside of the curve. And then you're going to switch when the candy cane goes around on the little part that's pointing down here. And you're going to put the highlight on the opposite side, just like you did for this one. Then rinse your brush. And we'll come into our really, really light golden color. Ah, my candy cane's gonna be fat because I just messed up and made it fatter. But who doesn't want a bigger candy cane? Okay. There we go. So I've got my shadow and my highlight color. I'm going to take a mostly clean brush and just try to hover over that line as best I can just to soften it a little bit. I know that's a tricky bit of blending, but give it a go. This is just kind of establishing some highlights and shadows, so you can definitely tweak it later. But let's get that general shape. While we're waiting for the base layer and our candy cane to dry, it will be a great time to come into some plain cadmium red medium and put in the first coat in this shiny ornament right over the dark green, okay? Right over the dark green, just a little bit of red. Don't worry about it being see-through. We're gonna build it up. Okay, so I'm gonna get this little circle shape. And then I'm going to go into a little bit of white and I'm going to tap it right where that light is hitting, kind of same side as on the boot, in the upper left. And we're going to tap it in just like we did on the toe of the boot, the fat side of our brush. Tap, 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 tap. Tap it in. Because this is a shiny object, we're going to get a really bright highlight on the other side as well, where different colors will be different lights will be reflecting on the opposite side because it's a shiny object. And the interesting thing about a shiny object too is we're going to get a bit more of a shadow still kind of in the middle. So you can darken in the middle with one of your darker reds. So really bright highlight here. A little bit of a reflected light on the other side. And we've got that orb looking nice and shiny. We can take a little bit of a light red, red plus white, into the top of these little balls too. And then the tiniest little pinprick of white, if we want these to look super shiny. Boop, boop. And then we've got some tiny little shiny berries in there. And speaking of berries, if you want some smaller little ones coming out of the stocking, just kind of picking up on the red of the candy cane and the boot, we're going to take our round brush. I'm going to use my number 1 round. And maybe just have some smaller ones. This is those final tweaks and adding little details in here, okay? So this is where you can have as many or as few of these as you want. Take your time. And maybe we have some little small clusters of berries. I'm going to take a dark red, red plus black or red plus green, and I'm going to have some little berries just cascading out of the back of my boot. And I'm gonna kind of make them get a little bit smaller as they trail down. So remember, pulling in the red right over the green. It's gonna look see-through, but with just a couple highlights, they'll be popping. So come into either some white or some red plus white for the first highlight. And you can put a little highlight in a light red first at the tips of the berries. You could use your light peachy color. And then I'm going to tap this highlight on. And then a little bit of pure white or whitish yellow. For that final bright highlight at the tips. You can even add little highlights into some of your small berries. We won't do the shadow side ones, but okay. For these candy canes, it's time to pull in the red stripes. I love painting candy canes. They are so much fun. And here we've got our nice shading on this candy cane. So it's for the stripes, they're gonna kind of come up on a diagonal. And I have mine coming up on a diagonal this way. So along the long shaft of the candy cane, it's pretty much all the same, up on an angle. But now we're at the part of the candy cane that's really, really bending over. So essentially our stripes, which are leaning up this way, are going to be leaning down the opposite way on the other side of the candy cane. So we've got to come up and then start really arcing over until we're now bending down on the opposite side. Let me show you that in paint because my pencil is a little bit light here. I'm going to go right into my cadmium red medium hue. So here, the nice thing about the red being see-through is we'll see both the shadow and the highlight right through the red color. So we've already done the hard work of shading in the underpainting. So now I'm going to pull my cadmium red medium. Make sure there's just a little paint on your brush. Up we go. You got this. And then we are coming over. So now instead of coming up and off, we're now arcing down the other way. Like that. Now we'll put one highlight down the candy cane once this is dry, and we'll be done. We already have that highlight at the top. It's looking luminous with all of this golden light to create a realistic lightscape in this painting. Now you don't have to sketch it on like I did. You can just paint these stripes on. So up here, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to come up on an angle this way. And now I'm at the bend. So now I need to start angling forward, pointy towards the bottom. See how it's kind of opening up as a V over the curve. And now I'm bending down, so my stripes are going the opposite direction, angling down. And even if I'm not drawing it on, I am trying to keep a similar amount of space between the whites and the reds. Okay. Down to the last two highlights. Sometimes I add a few little black twigs, like the berries are sticking off of twigs. We'll do a little highlight on our candy cane. And for anyone that wants more of a gold color on their boot, you're going to take a little bit of cadmium yellow and add a little bit of your sepia color. So it's more yellow, but it's going to be a darker kind of golden yellow. Okay, so it'll be a darker yellow like this. And as you can see, the color is quite see-through, so we will be able to see all the shading that we did, which is great. We don't have to do it again. So I'm going to take just a little bit of this gold right into my, oops, I got red on my brush, right over this buckle with a little round brush, a little detail brush, just because I like the whole golden quality of this painting. So it doesn't have to be perfect. You can still see where the highlights are in the grayscale you put underneath. I want the gold to be in the little trim as well. Yeah, so that's all I did is I lightly, this is called glaze painting, by the way, when you put a see-through layer of color over top so that you can see what's underneath. Glaze painting. Oops, you can beef up the highlights if you like. And then if you do want to do some little sprigs to attach the berries to like a stem, you want to have a 0 round brush and add lots of water. Getting fine lines in painting is a challenge, and adding water to your paint to make it more fluid will greatly make it much easier to do. Think about trying, that's why we write fine calligraphy with ink and not a toothpaste consistency paint, which is what we're working with here without water in it. So you're making it ink-like to get control over the fine lines. I've got my little brush here. I'm looking at the tip, there's no gobs. And then I want you to practice with that fluid paint, pushing hard or light. And even though I've been painting for several decades, if I'm rushing or not in a good headspace, I can make blobby lines just like everyone else. So sometimes I'll do little warm-ups, little brush work like this to help get me in the zone. Okay, so we're gonna do little twigs. So that might look like the center twig and then branching off for the berries. Okay, let's try to get a nice fine line before we apply to the project. And it is over a dark base, so we're not gonna see too much of it, but for instance, I might want to have a little bit of a line showing down this little tendril here, or a little bit of one showing here. or a little bit of one showing here. Yeah, it's subtle, but can be nice to have. Let's make sure our candy canes are nice and dry and put on the final highlight. This is going to make the candy can look like the shiny, juicy candy that it is. So I'm going to dry the background, the candy cane specifically. And I'm going to add a little water onto my paper towel just to get rid of any pencil lines, chalk lines. Take a little brush, it could be your flat brush or a little round brush. Go into some white. And we're gonna highlight just inside. Make sure it's not so wet that it's gonna dollop off the edge of your brush. Kind of just inside because it's round. This is kind of like the utmost part of the candy cane. We're gonna highlight here and a little bit here. Sometimes I'll rub it with my finger a little bit. But there's that shiny quality to the candy cane. You can add a little water to your paint, but it's going to highlight over both the red and the shadow color alike because the whole thing is shiny. Okay? You can tweak any little highlights you want before you wrap up for the day. Take your time. I packed this full of juicy textures and details so you could stay busy painting for a few hours. And don't be afraid to break projects up into smaller sessions if you're really short on time. Anytime we pause to dry, you can pause your painting and come back to it at a later date. I might add a few little white or light colored wisps of the fur coming out over top of the greenery. For this to be a believable light, we do have to have it pretty shadowy on this side. When you feel like you're finished, sit back, relax, and roll your shoulders because you just finished painting the Santa's boot. Today you tackled a colored ground and multiple layering techniques as well as fine details to capture this classical style painting of a holiday theme. We did some blending to create a soft, fuzzy look using water around the edge of dollops of colors and tackled a glowing light where it's a darker version of the color on the outside, a lighter version on the inside. Glazed painting over top of the gray buckle in the boot with some gold, and how to create three-dimensionality by thinking always of where the light source is. To capture texture, it's really all about where the highlights and shadows fall on an object. So we could make the top of this boot look shiny if it was all a solid color, and the highlights just where the light source is. We made it look furry because we did a broken texture with our brush. So I want you to be thinking about that when you're working on your paintings. Always think about where the light is coming from. And I want you to think about more of painting values, shadows, and highlights and textures than about painting a boot, a stitch, a light. Think about, is it a hard edge or a soft edge? Where is the light? Where is the shadow? Honestly, with creating realistic forms like we've done here, even in a fantasy object, training your artist eye to recognize highlights and shadows is truly half the battle. So I want you to be proud of all of the work that you have accomplished today. If you would like to share it, your painting, you can post it in our private Facebook sharing community, and we can all celebrate your progress together. If you are not currently in our sharing group, I will post a link below so that you can join. This class I offer free for a limited time. I have offered every class I have done, which is getting close to 600. We're in that 550 mark. I've offered each one free for a week. And if you're one of my Kick Academy subscribers, you have access to all 500 plus classes. Plus, our Kick Academy members get to vote on a subject that's just for them. And they also have access to past challenges like the tree challenge we just ran, where we took a deep dive in how to paint trees by simplifying them into basic shapes and forms. That is it for today's tutorial. Before I go, let's take a peek at what's coming up. Tomorrow, we are going to paint something completely different. We're going to do an outdoor landscape featuring snowy trees, the realistic sparkle of light on snow at night. And we are going to add a tiny little Santa and reindeer. I'm going to show you up close always how to draw that Santa and reindeer silhouette. And don't worry, I promise it will be easier than it looks. After that, we are going to do something fun and festive. Oops. And we are going to paint, I don't know why that won't stay up, a candy cane cocktail. My slideshow is weird. Anyways, there it is. More candy canes, more flickering lights, more holiday themes. And I have fully planned out what we're going to do. I think there's 8 or 9 more weekends until it is Christmas. So if there is a holiday theme that you would love to paint with me, my schedule is not set in stone this year, so you can write it in the comments below and I will add it to my roster of ideas. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care, and until next time, I hope you keep it colorful. Bye.